Pranav, are you there? You can go to start.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm ready to start then. But good morning. Before we officially begin today's session, help me in welcoming singer Arathirika Krishnakumar, who will be singing for us today.
Vanakkam everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Soundar uncle, Rajan uncle, and the Vishnupuram Literary team for giving me this opportunity. Today I will be singing Ulagam Yavayum, the opening song from Kamba Ramayanam, composed by Rale Rajan. One of the beautiful things about this song is that it doesn't mention any specific deity, so everyone can connect with it in their own way. It addresses that one that created everything. I hope you all enjoy it. உலகம் யாவையும் தாமுளவாக்கலும் உலகம் யாவையும் தாமுளவாக்கலும் நீலை பெருத்தலும் நீக்கலும் நீலை பெருத்தலும் நீக்கலும் நீங்களா அழகிலா விளையாட்டுடையார் அவர் அழகிலா விளையாட்டுடையார் அவர் தலைவர் அன்னவர்க்கே சரண் நாங்களே அன்னவர்க்கே சரண் நாங்களே அன்னவர்க்கே சரண் நாங்களே அஞ்சிலே ஒன்று பெற்றான் அஞ்சிலே ஒன்றை தாவி அஞ்சிலே ஒன்று பெற்றான் அஞ்சிலே ஒன்றை தாவி அஞ்சிலே ஒன்றாராக ஆறுயிர்க்காக ஏகி அஞ்சிலே ஒன்றாராக ஆறுயிர்க்காக ஏகி அஞ்சிலே ஒன்று வைத்த அணங்கை கண்டேலாரூரில் அஞ்சிலே ஒன்று வைத்த அணங்கை கண்டேலாரூரில் அஞ்சிலே ஒன்று வைத்தான் அவன் எம்மை அழித்து காப்பான் அஞ்சிலே ஒன்று வைத்தான் அவன் எம்மை அழித்து காப்பான் அஞ்சிலே ஒன்று வைத்தான் அவன் எம்மை அழித்து காப்பான் உலகம் யாவையும் தாமுளவாக்கலும் நீலை பெருத்தலும் நீக்கலும் அழகிலா விளையாட்டுடையார் அவர் அழகிலா விளையாட்டுடையார் அவர் தலைவர் அன்னவர்க்கே சரண் நாங்களே அன்னவர்க்கே சரண் நாங்களே அன்னவர்க்கே சரண் நாங்களே. Thank you everyone.
And thank you for that wonderful introduction to the morning. And with that, I would like to proceed. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pranav Ravikumar, and it is my absolute honor to officially welcome you to today's quarterly Gannasu session. Since we pioneered this forum back in 2020, our goal has been simple yet profound: to bring the voices of world literature directly to our community. Our early pioneers include A. Muthilingam, Ki Rajanayanan, Nanjil Naran, Thomas Purisima, and the latest by M. Naveen. I want to express my deepest gratitude for the Vishnupuram Literary Circle, USA, for their tireless efforts in making this space possible. And of course, a heartfelt welcome to our distinguished guest speaker, who has graciously carved time out of his schedule to be with us today. I'm incredibly excited to moderate this conversation. Every now and then, the literary world meets an individual who doesn't just read books, but breathes life back into the silent corners of history. Our guest today is one of those rare individuals. To the academic world, he is Professor Peter Constantine, a renowned literary translator, editor, and the director of the Literary Translation Program at the University of Connecticut. His accolades read like a map of literary excellence. He is a Guggenheim Fellow, a Berlin Prize Fellow, an NEE Translation Fellow, and a recipient of the prestigious PEN Translational Prize and the National Translation Award. He has translated the monoliths of our global library: Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Machiavelli, Voltaire, and Sophocles. But if we look past the titles and award, we find a story that is profoundly human. Imagine a 3-year-old growing up in a home where the world's borders dissolved at the kitchen table. His father, a British man of Turkish descent, would tell him, "Speak English." His mother, from Austria, would insist to speak German. By the time he was 10, living on the outskirts of Athens, Greece, he was picking up the Romani language. This wasn't just someone growing up in a multilingual environment. This was someone whose very identity was formed at the crossroads of human connection. Today, he speaks German, modern Greek, ancient Greek, Italian, Russian, French, and Afrikaans fluently. He is a person who looks at the Romani language and sees the invisible, ancient threads connecting it to Sanskrit. What makes Professor Constantine's work truly powerful is what he chooses to do with this gift. He once said something that strikes at the very heart of why we gather here today. He observed that when a language fades away, when it is spoken by only a single village and then falls silent, it is not just the words that go to the graveyard. Along with those words, the culture, the traditions, the memories, and the hard-earned wisdom of hundreds of thousands of people vanish forever. Professor Constantine refuses to let these voices die. He is a rescuer of lost things. When the literary world thought it knew everything about Anton Chekhov, Peter went digging into the archives to unearth, identify, and translate the English-speaking world had never seen, giving us the undiscovered Chekhov. When Natalie Babel, the daughter of the great Isaac Babel, dreamed of gathering her father's scattered historical writings into a single place, it was Peter who stood by her side to co-edit and translate the complete works of Isaac Babel, rescuing 117 stories from the shadows of time. From translating 400-year-old Renaissance texts like Machiavelli's The Prince, to capturing the biting, timeless satire of Voltaire's Candide, to writing his own beautifully resonant 2023 novel, The Purchased Bride, his life work is about ensuring that humanity's collective soul remains unbroken. We in the Tamil literary community feel a special bond with him. This past year, he joined us in New York as a guest speaker at the Living Lit Fest Tamil Festival, a historic milestone where his presence reaffirmed our deep literary traditions are a vital part of the global tapestry. Our friends Miss Sharada and Miss Radhika have been conversing with him, sharing insights, and preparing the ground for what promises to be an unforgettable morning. So whether you are joining us here to think philosophically about the world, to protect languages of our ancestors, or to simply marvel the magic of storytelling, you are in the right place. Please join me in giving a magnificent, warm, Ganasu welcome to the preserver of culture, a champion of endangered tongues, and a true living bridge between the worlds, Professor Peter Constantine. Welcome, Professor. We are so incredibly happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Also, thank you very much for the kind words and this very kind introduction. I'm quite touched. It is like a panoramic presentation of all the literary interests and all the books that I so love that you've mentioned. I'm also very happy to say that I see that Judy Sternlight, who was my editor for very many of those books at Random House, is present. So that was a great support then. I'm delighted to see her here among the audience. So thank you very much. I'm very touched.
Thank you again for your presence here today. It means the world. Now, before we dive into our first question, I would like to bring two very important voices who have helped shape today's events. Our friends, Ms. Sharada Narasimhan and Ms. Radhika Ramesh, have been in continuous conversation with Professor Constantine over the last few months, truly getting to know his work, his passions, and his unique worldview. In fact, during our Tamil Literary Festival, they put together a beautiful, deeply insightful introductory video exploring Peter's life and his translations. Today, Miss Sharada will talk on stories from the complete works of Isaac Babel, and Miss Radhika will talk on the works of Peter's language reclamation. And now, Miss Sharada, I would love to hand the floor over to you to share your thoughts, introduce your video, and help set the stage for our discussion today. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Peter. It's a real honor to be speaking while you're present here.
Thank you
I
very
would I would like to start off by asking how I cannot believe I haven't read Isaac Babel until then. So Isaac Babel, the Russian Jewish writer from early 20th century, he lived only for 45 years, wrote relatively little, and spent the last years of his life in silence. He silenced himself, and he was finally executed by Stalin. He left a very small body of work. His complete works come to about 1,000 pages.
Yes, that is so, 1,000 pages.
Yes, but what he left behind places him among the masters of 20th century literature. And critics say that for English readers, the difficulty has been that Babel's genius depends so much on his language, the rhythm, the compression, like the economy of his words, and the strange collisions of images. And I haven't read many other translations, but you only need to read one story of Babel to understand his style. It is so distinct. And later I will be talking about two translations I read and to see what a translator brings to a story. So I had the opportunity to read a few stories from Peter Constantine's complete collections, complete works of Isaac Babel. And it doesn't just give access to Babel's stories. I think it gives access to Babel's voice. So to understand Babel, we really have to start from the world he was writing out of. He was born in 1894 in Odessa. And Odessa at that time was a very cosmopolitan city. And it was almost 1/3 Jewish, but it also had several other cultures, and he was influenced by all of them. And he comes of age through the Russian Revolution, and he lives through Stalinist Russia, and he was eventually killed in the 1930s. In 1939, he was executed at the age of 45. So he wrote as a Jew in a country that had just finished the pogroms. And it was about to begin something worse than that in Stalinist Russia. But it was a unique time in Russian history where the czarist censorship had just been removed, and there was this renewed sense among writers that anything could be written. So his most famous work is The Red Cavalry, where he actually traveled as a war correspondent in the Polish-Soviet War, and he writes about, it's a semi-fictional story. He writes about what he sees in the war, pretty much. He just records what he sees in the war. Those are his most famous work. So like I said, you only have to read one of his stories to understand what critics talk about in his style he is known as one of the great compressors in world literature. His sentences are meticulously crafted. There is very little abstraction going on. He wants you to feel the weight of what the images he's showing. And we'll talk more about that when I talk about the Red Cavalry stories. But his most famous quote will give you his philosophy about writing. It goes like this: "No iron pierces the heart as easily as a period placed at the right moment." And that's exactly right. Like his style is defined by that. Every word seems crafted and placed in the right spot to evoke the right feeling. And restraint is very intentional. And restraint is how he evokes feeling, not by absence of restraint. His most famous works, like I said, is the Red Cavalry stories. And he travels with the Cossack army in the Polish-Soviet War. I read the first few opening stories, and with each story, he builds upon the experience of going into the war. And the first story opens up with this beauty of the landscape. There are these poppy fields, endless poppy fields, and the beauty. And then immediately there is this orange sun, the sunset, that is being described as rolling in the sky like a head. That's just one example of what he does with words. The brutality and tenderness and beauty are juxtaposed everywhere. Like there is beauty, and right next to it, violence. And there is blood. The river is full of blood. It's full of wagons. But then he's describing the moon that is moving like a snake in the river. It's a very distinctive style. My favorite was the third story called The Letter. It just gives a flat, unemotional account of a boy, a Cossack boy, writing to his parents about what's happening in the war. And he asked this war correspondent to write that letter because he is illiterate. And it's about how his brother killed their own father in the war, and they are on opposite sides in the war. And it's all said in this flat tone. He's just giving an account of his father being killed and the atrocities of the war. Again, beauty and atrocity sitting in the same sentence. Red Cavalry is what he's most famous for. But what I would like to focus on today is another story that I found so endearing. I wanted to take you to somewhere quieter and much earlier. So this story, I read the story first. When I was researching Babel, it was one of the first stories that appeared because it was published in New Yorker. And at first, I read a different translation that was published in the New Yorker. It was called "You Must Know Everything." And I really fell in love with that story and with Babel. That was the first thing I read of him. And later, I read Peter's translation that is in the collection, and I will tell you about what a different experience it was. Let me tell you about the story first. Here's what happens in the story. A boy, this is set in Odessa, where he grew up, and he is Jewish, and this is Saturday, Sabbath. And this boy, he comes, this narrator is recollecting a day from his childhood. And this boy comes from 6 classes at school, and now after to his grandmother's place. He goes to his grandmother's place to spend Sabbath there, and there, his grandmother's place, she keeps it very hot because she's always cold and it's very suffocating. And he still has a whole evening of classes to go through. He has a violin lessons to take, he has Hebrew classes, and he has to do all his homework before that and prepare for it. And his grandmother is just sitting there in the corner the entire time, just watching him with fierce devotion. Just she does not take her eye out of him. So she listens to him read his Russian lessons. She does not speak Russian very well. She does not understand it very well. Yiddish is her language, but she listens to every single thing she says and listens to all his science lessons, and feeds him an enormous dinner. Just that love showered through food and attention. And there is this dog, Mimi, who is just sitting in that corner, just wonderful dog character. And in this setting, suddenly, like, she starts talking about when his homework is done and classes are done, she starts talking about her experiences when she was living in Poland. And they are just brutal, violent stories about how one person was killed by what almost looks like some kind of a person approaches a rabbi for justice, and then comes home and finds the person who he was complaining about dead. So is it a vengeful God? Maybe. But then there is this account, a Polish count being shot and killed. And she's recalling all these stories from her past. And earlier also, this boy is reading a story of Turgenev, and there is violence in that story. And all this violence is just like interwoven with all the tenderness in the story. This is the entire story. They eat the dinner and the story is done. And towards the end, one thing happens. The grandmother has, the maid is very rough with some of her kitchenware, and she yells at her, and shouts at her and wants her to get out of the house. And there is such shocking cruelty in her voice, and that disturbs the boy so much. And that's it. And then they eat a sumptuous dinner and go to bed. So this story, why did it have such an impact on me? One thing you can already see, so Babel wrote the story when he was 21, and you can already see all the elements that he is famous for in the story that he wrote at 21. I somehow like these early stories, Odessa stories and early stories, even better than the Red Cavalry stories. And this Odessa here, again, it is not it is very Jewish, but different from other Jewish writers I have read, like Singer or Bellow, in that this Odessa he is not focusing on his Jewishness, even though it's there in every story. It's just a Russian story. And it's not set in like the Polish shtetl like Singer's, or the very New York Jewish environment. It's just, and you can see that like he's learning French and German and violin lessons. It feels different. And that is because of what kind of place Odessa was at that time. So that is what struck me in this story, just the juxtaposition of the tenderness of like saving the last slice of honey cake for the child and then being cruel to the maid, and the effect it had on the child. And you can viscerally feel it when you read the story. And I would like to say a few words about the translation. Like I said, the first version I read was Max Hayward's, and it was really beautifully written. It was a beautiful translation and great English prose, and I fell in love with the story. And then I read Peter's translation. And I can only think of one way to describe the effect it had on me. It almost felt like I had been watching the dubbed version of a movie, a foreign movie, and now I get to read the subtitle version. Somehow the character, the grandmother, felt more Russian. I can imagine the words in Peter Constantine's translation coming out of a Russian Jewish grandmother. Whereas the characters in the other translation almost sounded British or like English. And you could clearly see that Hayward had smoothed out the edges for an English reader, and Peter's version preserves some of that foreigners. Don't know enough to say if it was more faithful to the original translation, but it does give me the feeling of reading a Russian story. I'll give you a couple of examples and I'll close off with that. For example, the title itself, Peter's translation is titled At Grandmother's. And the other translation is titled, You Must Know Everything. And that is a key point in the story where the grandmother, when she recalls all her past, and she tells this grandchild that you must know everything. You have to learn science and all, French, German, everything, and you have to become a rich man. And somehow Hayward foregrounds that for us by putting that in the title. And that gives a different feeling when you read the story. And let me give you another example. So here is the boy is walking on the street in the beginning of the story, and he's actually looking at some lingerie in a store. And there's another guy who stops by, and he says something to him. He's like, so this is Hayward's translation. He was grinning all over his face, and he said, having a good look, eh? I blushed. He gave me a knowing pat on the back and said condescendingly, keep it up, old fella. Good for you. All the best. And this is Peter's translation. He smiled at me and asked, so you're examining these closely, are you? I was mortified. Then he patronizingly patted me on the back and said in a superior tone, keep up the good work, dear colleague. My compliments. All the best. Again, it's just a different style. And I prefer the latter. Your preference might be different. Hayward also adds some information. For example, when he talks about how the grandmother's Russian is bad, he adds this information here. She was at home only in Yiddish. And he gives that extra information to the English reader just to like, and he refers to Hebrew as Jewish language. He makes it a little bit easier for the reader who might not be aware that Jewish people in Russia were speaking Yiddish. And Peter does not do that. His translation does not have that line in it. And there is another place where the grandma says that she wants the boy to be a rich man. And in Peter's translation, the word bogatir is there. And that means, that's what she called a rich man. But bogatir is actually a Yiddish word for like a folk war hero. And that's in the footnotes. And I loved having that extra information that was missing in Hayward's. Like I said, the only way I can think of describing is like watching a movie with subtitles instead of a dubbed movie, and the grandma talking like a Russian lady, and somehow the experience of it was very different. And I really look forward to reading the rest of the stories in this collection. There's a whole bunch of them. And I would like to end with thanking Peter for giving us access to Babel's genius. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this incredible introduction to Babel's work. I mean, that was really uh, so, I think, in depth. And what I really found interesting is how you spotted all the things that were important, I think, not only in the work, but also, I think, to Isaac Babel uh, personally, and to his great representative, Natalie Babel, his daughter, who curated and spent her life really trying to bring as much of his work out as possible. And in fact, well, I must say as well, I'm very happy to see in the audience Jennifer Lyons, who's she's the well, the curator, not the curator, the word is slipping away from me, but she runs the Babel estate. She controls it, let's say. She's the one who now is the ambassador for Isaac Babel. We have royalty presence here at this meeting. So that's delightful. But yeah, what had happened was that I had found some screenplays of Isaac Babel. This is now 25, 26, 27 years ago, actually, so quite a while ago. I'd found some screenplays that nobody knew anything about, and they were as stunning as the stories that you have described. Very, very to the point, and in fact, perhaps not the best screenplays, because of course a screenplay has to be a screenplay per se, and not do these stylistic things that Babel was so well known for. So they were fascinating, and the idea was, I thought to myself, I'd like to do something like the undiscovered Babel. And I'd gathered those together for the press, New Directions. I got myself a contract and was about to sign when the phone rang, and there was Natalie Babel, and she said, "Stop!" She said, "First of all," she said, "I would like to lay out how things should be done, and what we really need is not a small book of unknown things. We need everything. It's time to have a complete Isaac Babel." And that was so the beginning of a fascinating journey, fascinating relationship. That's also how I got to know Jennifer Lyons. We've worked together now ever since, and that is pretty much how this started. Um, and I also think that what you said about the concision of his writing, I think, is very important. One thing I wanted to say, if you read the Red Cavalry, each one of those stories are really just 2 pages long. One would think, the way you introduced them, that we're talking here about major long short stories, but the concision is really there. He would cut and cut and cut and rewrite. They say that he would rewrite something 100 times until it was just right. We don't have the different versions. We just have the final versions. And in fact, we have the final versions in two versions. One is the way they initially came out in 1924, 25 in various literary magazines. Those were censored slightly because, as you had pointed out, censorship had fallen away after the Tsar censorship, and there was this wild freedom. In early Soviet Russia, people felt that this is the first time in the world that you can actually write exactly what you want without any problem. Now, unfortunately, the axe fell after that. And what that meant was that many people who had expressed themselves, like Isaac Babel, paid the price. And his writing was one of the reasons, many people will say the one reason, why he was executed in 1939 to 1940, at the beginning of 1940, because of what he wrote. That unfortunate freedom that lasted from 1918 to about 1924, 25, 26, and then became the Stalin years that started in 1930, where the censor was absolutely rabid and extreme. And as you pointed out, there was silence in Babel's writing. He stopped writing pretty much in the 1930s because he really couldn't write anymore, meaning that anything he wrote would have been incriminating. Actually, that was a time when he started working with film and did screenplays, and some of those have lost. I think we have only 4 screenplays of his that have survived that we know about. So that's and the stories, the fact that you have a long short story, or maybe even a full novel in 2 pages, is really interesting, and I think a wonderful read. Like if you want to read 12 novels, then read The Red Cavalry, and they are 12 novels in small bites. You can literally sit down in 15 minutes and experience a whole world. And what is also part of his masterly type of writing is that it's not condensed. You would think, oh, it's terribly condensed. In order to bring all of that information in, it must be an absolute foot slog to sort of read that, very tiring. No, there's this lightness. It's very light. Those sentences with the period or the full stop that comes like a nail, or like a nail that's hammered in, that I think is also part of that technique. So these are, I would recommend Red Cavalry. I think, well, actually, I recommend everything. It would be wonderful if you start if you get the complete works and start at the beginning and read all the way to the end. But I think the 2 important things are, in fact, Red Cavalry and then the Odessa stories. So that gives you that full exposure to Isaac Babel that is so fascinating. Something else I would say is, as you read the Red Cavalry, it would be interesting to read it side by side with his diaries, because then you see, actually, you had mentioned fictionalized reality, let's say, or that these things really did happen and that it's a fictionalized version of them. And it's an interesting quest to sort of figure out how much actually did happen. And I think it mainly did. Yes, they are fiction, they are short stories, they are fiction, but they are actually just as real as you would find out in the diaries. And the reason why Red Cavalry, I think, is such an important work as well, and also important in a terrible way, is that he spoke his mind. Budyoni, who was the leader of the Red Cavalry, he presents him with all his errors. His language, you mentioned about language, he spoke a catastrophic Russian. My very first thought when I saw it on the page was that Budyoni, like, is he maybe not is Russian not his mother tongue? Like, how can he make such mistakes? And I kept the errors, the things like starting out in the singular and ending in the plural. Mismatching adjectives, mixing feminine and masculine, and it's almost as somebody who's maybe a first-year Russian speaker, but then also having bits of dialect, and then maybe also using these highfalutin Soviet Leninist Marxist expressions mixed in, but grammatically wrong, I will say something that I thought that was very strange, and I will say that, yes, when I heard W. Bush speak and saw his trouble, that he did some similar stuff start in a certain way, and his sentences would kind of fall apart because of the way, maybe too many thoughts coming in at the same time, and not sure where to go. And I thought, aha, that's very much like Budyoni, except, of course, that W. Bush had a strong education. Budyoni learned to read and write when he was in his 20s. So there's a difference there, of course. So there's that illiterate undertone as well. But Budyoni became the most powerful person in the Soviet Union. He was a marshal of the Soviet Union. He survived Stalin, he and Stalin were great friends, and Budyonny was absolutely furious about the Red Cavalry, the way he was presented in it. So that was the one major error that Isaac Babel did, was to present him as such. I mean, error personally, because the Red Cavalry was an absolute major bestseller, not only in Russia, but also internationally. When it came out, no one had ever seen writing like that. This type of writing was completely new. It was compelling. It was fascinating. There were lines around the block, people buying this book, and that's the last thing that Budyonny wanted. Timoshenko was another major figure who Babel made fun of not fun of, but let's say showed, because there is humor in Babel, but Babel mainly showed things as they are. So with Budyonny, it was very important for him to look good. He perfumed himself and he sat there on his horse and then made these statements that nobody could quite understand. Babel showed him as such. That was not the image that Budyonny wanted. Budyonny wanted the major general of the Russian cavalries, the major war hero. He got three medals as hero of the Soviet Union 3 times. Despite the disastrous campaigns, because it was a disastrous campaign, as you will see if you read Red Cavalry. In fact, all of Budyonny's campaigns also in World War II ended up being disastrous. Anyway, I'm emphasizing that because of the tragedy that's between the lines of the fact that kind of writing is what led to the Babel falling victim to the Stalinist purges in 1939, and then he was executed very early in the early weeks of 1940. So
Peter, thanks for such a wonderful explanations and clarifications that you provided. And then we have another speech coming in, and then we will have at the end we have a Q&A session, so that we can cover.
Yes, I'm sorry if I went on too long. Actually, I got it's such a wonderful chance to reminisce about Isaac Babel after so many years.
I know. Like, yeah, thank you. Pranav, yeah, you can go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for Ms. Sharada, and thank you for Professor Constantine for the excellent insights onto Isaac Babel and to why he was so significant. I would like to hand it off to Mrs. Radhika to explore Peter's Reclamation of language now.
Hello. Well, thank you all for being here. I'd like to welcome Peter Constantine and thank both him and the organizers for making this event possible. Peter, thank you for your wonderful explanation about Babel just now. I also happened to read At Grandmother's and I enjoyed it very much. I am going to be talking about Peter's upcoming book on language reclamation projects. I'd like to start with an anecdote from my own life. About a year ago, my mother, who lives in India, she sent me a WhatsApp voice recording in which she recorded about 20 Tamil proverbs, things like Verum Kayila Morampor, things like that, which can be roughly translated to building castles in the air. And my mother uses a lot of these proverbs when she talks. And she told me that she'd noticed that when she talked to her grandsons, my sons, she noticed that they didn't really understand what she was talking about, and that she was having a hard time explaining these proverbs to them. And this got me thinking about language loss in my own family. Felt a sense of sadness. I felt like I had failed to transmit the language to my children, and that they were losing not just the vocabulary, but they were also losing the humor, the imagery, metaphors, cultural expressions, and quite really a whole way of looking at the world. Tamil is not an endangered language. There are about 80 million Tamil speakers in the world today. But we live in the United States where English surrounds us every day. And I can already see how a language doesn't have to disappear from the world for it to disappear from a family. Maybe not in my generation, maybe not even in my son's, but we can see it happening. And there's a sense of loss in that. There's a sense of sadness in that. Well, imagine the loss then for people who've already lost their language, or whose language was taken away from them. And with the language, they also lost, they lost their identities, they lost their stories, they lost their humor, they lost an ancient way of looking at the world and understanding the world. And this is something very precious and very important. Many of these languages have been lost for over 100 years. And many of these communities are actually taking back these languages through a process called language reclamation. And Peter is currently working on a book on the reclamation of languages all around the world, where he is investigating why these communities want to take back their languages and how they are doing it. In his book, Peter's focus is on indigenous languages that were lost usually because of colonization, forced assimilation, displacement, those kinds of reasons. Now, language reclamation is different from language revitalization. I only mention this because I didn't know this when we got started on this, on learning about this. Language revitalization is about saving a declining language, a severely endangered language. And these languages typically have a few fluent speakers or terminal speakers. A terminal speaker is one of the last surviving native speakers of the language. So the goal of language revitalization is to increase the number of speakers, to increase language fluency, language competency, etc. And this is done by, you could develop dictionaries, you could have programs in schools or immersion programs, etc. And the fluent speakers usually participate in these efforts. Now, language reclamation is something quite different. Here we're dealing with a language that's already been gone. In several cases, it's been gone for 100 years. And the focus is not so much on developing fluency, although that could be a goal, but the focus is more on taking back control of the language, to take back rights to the language. And with that, you're reclaiming your identity, your distinct identity. And so before we go into a little bit more detail about language reclamation, I want to mention that Peter's interest in language revitalization and language reclamation is not just scholarly, it is quite personal. Peter himself is one of the terminal speakers of a severely endangered language called Arathirika. This language is related to medieval Albanian and was spoken in several parts of Greece. Like many minority languages, Arathirika did not disappear overnight. For much of the 20th century, the Greek state promoted a single national identity centered on the Greek language. And minority languages like Arathirika, they were discouraged and sometimes even actively suppressed. So as it happens, many families moved to cities. Greek became the language of work, of education, of opportunity, and parents stopped passing Arathirika on to their children. And today it survives mainly among older speakers, and the chain of transmission has been largely broken. This is a process we are familiar with. Going back to language reclamation, how do you reclaim a language that's been lying dormant for a century or more? Reclamation projects are essentially reconstruction projects. They don't aim to recreate the language as it once was. They use fragments of whatever is available, and then they kind of fill in the blanks with words from related languages. The starting point for these reconstruction projects is often historical archives and documents. And there's a real irony here. The irony is that in many cases, the colonizer himself was the archivist, the jailer was the archivist, the missionary was the archivist. And that's where the source of the language reconstruction projects is. I'm going to share just a few images now, just so you can see the names of the languages I'm going to talk about. 1 second. Can you see the document? Okay. So I'm going to start with Wampanoag. So take the case of the language of the Wampanoag people, for example. Now, this language used to be spoken by a Native American tribe living in the Cape Cod region of the United States. After 130 years of silence, Wampanoag language has its first native speaker. That's in over a century. The source for this language reconstruction primarily is a Bible that was translated from English to Wampanoag with the aim of converting the Wampanoag people to Christianity. They also used other Wampanoag documents like letters and wills and petitions and things like that. And the mission of the Wampanoag Reconstruction Project is to create language fluency. And this is done through a lot of cultural activities, language courses, immersion programs, etc. They have a website that's very interesting if you want to learn more about this. Another language that I want to talk about is the Cornish language spoken in Cornwall in England. I was actually very surprised to learn that the Cornish language is also a reconstructed language. Cornish actually went extinct in the 18th century, and the language is brought back using historical texts. An entire new vocabulary was created for modern concepts, spelling was standardized, etc. And these, we even have Tintin comics translated into Cornish in the present day. This process has taken a while. It's been going on for about 120 years. And in 2010, UNESCO reclassified Cornish from being extinct to critically endangered. And then we move on to another relatively well-known language called Palavakani. This is a reconstructed language constructed from the remains of many Tasmanian languages. Again, the source was records from jailers at Aboriginal establishment camps, like concentration camps for the Aborigines, basically. And then it's important to note that language reclamation projects are not led by linguists outside of the community. Very often, these efforts are led by community members themselves who learn linguistic methods and work on retrieval and reconstruction. Now, I want to contrast these languages, Wampanoag, Cornish, and Palavakani, with the Sakhalin Ainu language. This was once spoken by across the southern Sakhalin Islands, which is now in Russia, and also northern Hokkaido, which is the northernmost island of Japan. An interesting side note on the Sakhalin Islands is that Russia established a penal colony on this island in the 1850s, and Anton Chekhov visited this penal colony, and he spent a few months interviewing many of the convicts and even wrote a memoir on this. It's called Sakhalin Island, if you want to learn more about that. But anyway, this language was lost when the people moved to Hokkaido and they were forced to assimilate into Japanese society. In the case of this language, the goal is not a full awakening as a vernacular. They don't believe that goal is realistic. The goal is primarily custodianship, so conducting research, documenting materials, etc. And finally, the last language I want to bring up here is called Ni-Norn. So this is Norn, N-O-R-N, was a Scandinavian language spoken in the Northern Isles of Scotland. It was related to Old Norse, and it went extinct. Ni-Norn, which essentially means New Norn, is an entirely reconstructed language. And the interesting thing is that it was developed entirely on online forums like Discord servers and the like. So this language does not exist in the community. It exists entirely online. So that's where the space for this language is. Let me stop sharing now. Okay. So what is common to all of these languages is that the community leads the efforts and decides what the goal of the project is. In some cases, it could be to develop fluency. In some cases, it could be just for ceremonial use or just to rebuild cultural identity. But the community decides what that goal is. Language loss often begins with political or social discrimination against the language or its speakers, as in the case of Indigenous American and Australian languages. But language loss isn't always so dramatic. It can happen through neglect. It can happen through displacement with a prestige language, such as English. And then the language is no longer learned by children as their native tongue. And such a language is called a moribund language. A moribund language is only spoken by the elders in the community. And as the language has no new speakers, and as the speakers grow old and die, the language dies with them. This is the reality in many Indian American families. We have seen that US-born children often become heritage speakers who understand the language, but they default to English. This is called receptive bilingualism or passive bilingualism. And many of them lose the language by adulthood unless they continue to use the language. We're all familiar with this. We know the loss. There are between 6,000 and 7,000 languages alive in the world today. Some of these languages have less than 10 speakers. Some of them have millions of speakers, like Tamil. We are losing languages at an alarming rate. Some say that we lose one language every 2 weeks. That's one language dying every 14 days. And what is lost when a language is lost? American linguist Ken Hale, who helped resuscitate the Wampanoag language, said this: when you lose a language, you lose a culture, an intellectual wealth, a work of art. It's like dropping a bomb on the Louvre. This is one of the most famous and striking descriptions of language loss that I've seen. I want to end on this note as a reminder of the cultural wealth that a language represents and that we should all strive to protect. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Radhika, for the incredible introduction to this international problem. Because as you pointed out, languages are dying now. Right now, they are saying 1 every 2 weeks. It'll pick up speed, is what they say as well. And what they say as well is that by the end of the century, it's unclear, but UNESCO points to 90% of the world's languages having disappeared by the end of the. So that is an ecological a disaster from a linguistic perspective. You might say, well, how beautiful Tamil is and how beautiful English is. These are languages that will survive. Who knows, though, what will happen in 200 or 300 years? Are we moving towards a monoculture where it just makes sense to speak English, or English with certain local variants? And we might then say, well, it's the language of Shakespeare. It's beautiful. It's rich. You can express everything you want in it. Let's just do that. What I often think of is that my favorite flower, and that might be not particularly inspired. I love red roses. Yeah. So let's say that English is a red rose, and all the plants in the world die, and we only have red roses. So we would have a beautiful but peculiar Armageddon type world. Like the end is nigh, when you have a world with just roses and no grass and no daisies, no poppies, no trees, no nothing. So I think we are in a sort of an emergency situation. I find it interesting, and I have noticed that the major reclamation projects that you've mentioned, and not just those around the world, all started pretty much in the 1980s with the first seeds, in the 90s. That's when the wave started, when people sort of realized. Some go back further, like Taya Hom of Assam. So the language they wanted, the community wanted to reclaim the language pretty much minutes after independence. So we're talking about late 1940s, early 50s. So it's interesting that it's one of the earliest modern, reclamation projects. But yes, and I found it very interesting what you said about the experience of communities, let's say, of Tamil speakers, where the grandmother speaks Tamil, maybe only Tamil, in an American setting. The parents speak both, but actually maybe kind of prefer to speak English. But yes, and then the children can understand. And that's exactly what is happening to languages such as Passamaquoddy, Maliseet in the United States, Arathirika, Ponash in Greece, Vlachika in Greece. We have about 8 or 9 languages, which even some Greeks don't know we have them because they're so not discussed, particularly new generations. So it is actually, I'd never thought of that like that. So thank you for bringing that up, that there is that parallel. So anyone who's experienced that within a family will know what it means like. Now, if you're in an act of desperation, you could say, well, in other words, if you are of a young generation of Tamil speakers who have lost the language and you want to reclaim the language, well, go to India. Spend a year there or 2, do online, get yourself an italki, maybe it's an online app, a teacher. You can learn it. But with languages such as Passamaquoddy, such as Penobscot, Arathirika, my own language, you cannot learn it. There is nothing. Actually, I'm thinking of doing a sort of a grammar and a reader. So I think that's my little next project. So that if there are people who want to learn the language, that they have that opportunity. So it's parallel, but in one case it's final. In the case of the indigenous languages that are no longer really spoken, and in the other case, one can do something about it. But actually, I could talk at length about this, and I'm worried, like as a elderly professor, to sort of start bloviating about this. Would you like to ask me some specific questions to sort of keep me organized, so that I respond in sound bites and not in whole lectures? Is this something that will particularly interest you?
I think there are questions coming up from our larger community after this. So I'm sure there'll be some questions on the topic.
Aha. So in other words, well, something else I want to say. On Wednesday, I'm going to northern Hokkaido, which you pointed to on the map, for the Ainu communities, because I want to in the book that is now being peer reviewed and prepared. I dealt with Sakhalin Ainu. That is, so Ainu is one of the languages of Japan. It is a language isolate, which also means that we're not sure what it connects to. So unlike Arathirika, which is my language, which is an albanoid language, like German, Dutch, Swedish are Germanic languages, Ainu is an isolate. Nobody knows where it came from. It's just there. And unfortunately, there too, now you really have, I think at this point, from what I understand, I'm going to be looking into that a bit more next week. You just have semi-speakers, meaning people who might remember parts of the language. And there it's a big problem creating the, as you pointed out, let's bring the language back into the community, but we are realists. We know that we won't be able to speak it exclusively. So that is one of the things that is happening in Ainu, and I think also in many other communities. Initially, when a language reclamation project might come back, it could be that the community might imagine and fantasize about having just a language that they can talk. But I think when you sit down and start studying, when your mother tongue is, let's say, English or Japanese, but the system is very, very different, that's when reality can make you choose more realistic ways of doing things. Now imagine, of course, let's say if I belong to a Tamil family and I know absolutely no more Tamil at this point, and I want to relearn the language, and I say I want to be able to speak fluently in Tamil the way it is spoken by a native Tamil speaker. Will I manage? Right? I mean, maybe, but won't there be accents? Won't there be grammatical errors? Will I know vocabulary, particularly for languages that have been lost, as one might say, from the community? How do you say certain things like love? If it wasn't written, then there we go. If the Bible is the only thing that you have, and this is another interesting thing that you pointed to, the fact that much of the material, almost in all reclamation projects, comes from either priests who translated the Bible into the language, sometimes not very well, sometimes into a pidgin version of the language, meaning, me see Christ come, when Christ come, he say, this kind of thing. So there's that issue as well. Like, what are you actually relearning? But you have what you have. So if that is the sort of pidgin type of simplified language, then at least it's something that's your own. The words are there. And I would like to say that there's also been some practical work. Neil Alexander Walker, who's worked with he's a linguist, and his wife is Southern Pomo. he's worked with the Southern Pomo community, and they have two languages there. One is that he has reconstructed and created a grammar for the language that ceased to be spoken about 50 years ago. Ceased to be spoken, ceased to be remembered, spoken every day, I think much longer back than that. But when the community realized that they could not relearn this extraordinarily complex language with words that just as an agglutinative language that adds and adds and adds and adds, and how do you do that when English is your language, you don't know how to do that. So what the practice was there was to create a simplified language. Again, me, you, me want, eat, me no want eat. So they insist that the pronunciation is correct. They insist that the words are correct and that it's used as a platform for those who want to then take it further. So immediately with 500 words, you can say whatever you want to say. But then beyond that, a certain group can study and learn the language in all its complexity. So they'll always be keepers. Yeah. If I have a few more minutes, I can say a few things about Palawakani, which is a very interesting situation that you brought up. I don't know if I'm running out of time or not, am I? Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead, Peter. Yeah, you can talk about it.
Also, Palawakani, which is the language of Tasmania that you pointed to on the map, that is a very unusual and fascinating situation. What the community has done there is that there were about 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 languages, we don't know. At the beginning of the 19th century is when many of those languages stopped being spoken. This is because the colonial situation was very, very brutal. And there was, I will say, it was like a genocide. I mean, you mentioned the concentration camps. That's people were gathered up and sent up into to Northern Ireland. Now, out of this catastrophic situation, the prison, the head of the prison camp, of the concentration camp, did language work. So to pass the time, I mean, there was no television, there were no iPhones, there was no radio, you didn't have many books. Boredom. Let's do something. Maybe I'm being unfair, but maybe not. I don't know. So let's do something to pass the time. Let's do word lists and examples and things like that. So anyway, that's what he did. So there are vocabularies from different languages. Sometimes one doesn't know where the languages are from or what they were. And what the community has done is recreated a language using different vocabularies. So in other words, everything is Tasmanian from the Tasmanian island, and it's a new language that has been created for the community. So that's a very different way of going about. There wasn't enough information on any single language to be able to bring that language back. So it's a fascinating, tour de force of language reclamation, an incredible example. And very quickly, Nunorn that you mentioned, which is the Scandinavian language of Scotland, Northern Islands. Yeah, that's interesting. That's more local people are like, let's bring the language back. It's not emotional. It's not we need our language. It was taken. Let's bring it back. So that's more of a sort of a hobby circle. But they're doing incredible things. I mean, I've seen mathematical terminology, and that is what many reclamation projects also do. They have what the Cornish call a wordsmithy, where either a community but also a group of specialists decide how to say air conditioner, refrigerator, maybe thank you, because not every language will say thank you. It might say things differently. And in fact, Arathirika didn't have a word for thank you.
Forgiveness? Okay.
Yeah, or forgiveness or things like that, yes. So it's I mean, Arathirika had different ways of expressing thanks. May you be well, or something like that, right? So I say that quickly in defense of my language. It's not that we're not thankful or that we don't have vocabulary for that. It's just a different way of engaging socially. And to bring it up to a modern speed, languages have to create certain words that were not part of the concept. Anyway, so I don't know. Is there anything else you'd like me to say? I could speak.
Yeah, we will cover as part of question and answer sessions. If anybody brings up that way, it's covered. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
I want to take a moment to appreciate Ms. Sharada and Ms. Radhika, as well as Professor Constantine, for their capturing of these important topics. And that is a great segue into like one of my first questions for you, Professor Constantine. Your work at UConn highlights a deep specialization for endangered languages. As globalization pushes English as almost the default language for international connection, smaller regional languages face continually an uphill battle. As a translator yourself, what role do you see in translation playing in keeping these older languages alive?
On a very basic level, and this is actually the project that I started on yesterday, so I'm glad you asked that. Translation can be what we call a crib. And a crib in translation means that it's a sort of a simple reflection of what is a simple translation of what the language that you're interested in. In other words, the endangered language or any language at all, any text. So a crib translation would be almost a word for word, so that you can see what it is, and it's often used in translation as a stepping stone for people who want to translate from a language that they don't know very well, maybe sometimes don't know at all, but can use that crib. So I would like to use a crib for Arathirika in order to help people with very little knowledge or no knowledge of the language make connections and see what the text is. So I think that's on one level. Another level, I think translating texts, sort of lost epics, lost literatures from different languages makes a wider public aware. And that can have other effects, such as maybe even on a very simple, basic level, help people to request funding in order to do research and to help revitalize the language. So I would say maybe those two very, very different things are at the core. A translation can be a gateway to a language, and with that as well, introduce a wider public to the language, but it can also, with that introduction to of the language to a wider public, help that awareness get funding, for instance. Most of these projects are terribly underfunded. Actually, we in Arathirika have absolutely no funding whatsoever. It's neglected, stamped out. Greece has never signed the European Charter for language minority rights. Other countries have, which would mean that we have a right to radio, we have a right to media, we have a right to lessons in the classrooms. Now, I'm not saying that the community necessarily wants that, so it's a double problem for us, because the community is quite happy to be Greek and to speak Greek. There is, in fact, no differentiation between Aravanit and Greek as in ethnic background. We're all considered Greek. By the way, I say we, but as you introduced me, I am of British, Turkish, and Austrian background. So it's my stepfather's family, and I grew up in that environment, speaking the language. So I would be, in fact, I could have been a Tamil speaker if my stepfather's family had been everyone speaking Tamil and insisting on talking that. So it's one of those strange situations where let's say the DNA and the language don't meet in my case, but I consider it a heritage language because I always spoke it. Yeah. I don't know, did I answer your question? I was sort of walking down memory lane again there for a moment.
I think it's very important that we almost in a way drift away from the topic and just kind of explore the nuances that exist within our lives. And I appreciate you for that question. And as a follow-up, I just want to appreciate like that macro view being so powerful, but I want to bring you down to your actual desk and the choices that you make on a translator. Because on one hand, you translate these massive names like Tolstoy and Machiavelli, but you also champion lesser known texts like Isaac Babel. For you personally, what criteria do you use when you choose a project? And how do you decide which voices are more deserving of your time in a new life in translation?
Well, projects come to the table in many ways. So the Isaac Babel came to the table because of Natalie Babel. And it was one of those like, stop, right? So it was actually quite dramatic. Don't do that, do this. So that was very funny and because Natalie Babel was a very charismatic and forceful and brilliant person, much missed. But so there it was more like an order. If you want to do Babel, it'll have to be that. It won't be this. And she was, well, I'm glad she insisted because it was a wonderful experience. And this was 26, 27, 28 years ago. So it was pretty much, I'd done my Thomas Mann book, and I'd done The Undiscovered Chekhov that you've mentioned, which was about 200 stories of Chekhov's that had not been translated before. So Isaac, doing the complete Isaac Babel was an early project, but it came at the right time because I was very focused on that period. I was sort of moving from late 19th century and the experimental writings of Anton Chekhov, because they were very, very experimental, like short stories done like a census report. Imagine in 1880 doing something like that. Or stories like Questions to a Mad Mathematicians, also like mathematician, who, when Dickens was writing in the UK, his fascinating texts, there was Chekhov doing these crazy things. Anyway, so from doing that work, moving forward in time and language into Isaac Babel was fascinating, particularly also because Russian changed dramatically in 1918 and left the imperial Russian type of speech to very communist, Marxist, inflected Russian, which Babel used. Anyway, so how do things come? I think interest on my part. Often also editors will say we would like to have a project. And I should also say, so Jennifer Lyons, who I've mentioned, who is the executor of the Isaac Babel estate and who's, I think, present. I saw her earlier. She is my agent. What very often happens is that she might suggest some projects and say that there's this fascinating project. Would you like to do it? For instance, that was the case with Hannah Arendt, The Letters. And in fact, also she's also the executor of Lotte Köhler's estate who arranged that. So I should say, actually, all right, a very, very important element in where projects come from and where ideas come from, for me personally, would be Jennifer Lyons, my agent, who is, I would say, America's top agent in international literature, particularly interested in international literature, which is great for a translator because that means that there are lots of ideas and connections and inspirations that come from that. So yes, in a nutshell, I would say either an editor will call and say, we have this book, or I'm really interested in something like Eleni Kefala, the Cypriot poet who I've been translating, who got 2 state prizes in Cyprus, she did. So that was something that I was interested in doing. And then major projects that Jennifer Lyons will present and suggest.
All right, thank you. I absolutely appreciate that answer, and I would like to hand it off to the community for any questions people may have in the audience now.
I think
See
we take
that.
Vivek was there with the question, right?
Yeah, I do have.
Go ahead.
Can I go or?
Go ahead, Vivek.
Thank you, Sharada and Radhika, for your wonderful and inspiring speeches. So, Professor Peter, I'm currently reading your Undiscovered Chekhov. You have translated an extraordinary range of writers from Chekhov, Thomas Mann, and Isaac Babel, and Tolstoy. So, in your LitHub interview, you describe translation as the purest form of writing. And yet, in the New York event, you have spoken about preserving the strangeness and ambiguity and even the fragmentation of authors rather than smoothing it out. So, my question to that aspect is when or then, where then do you think the translator ceases to be a writer, instead becomes the custodian of another writer's imagination?
Oh, well, thank you very much for that question. Actually, so when I say, and it's not, I don't know who first said that writing is a translation is the purest form of writing. I can't remember who. I'm actually pretty much quoting a school of thought, and the school of thought there being is that it's pure writing because I don't have to think about plot. I don't have to think about creating characters. I don't have to think about all the things that disturb a writer. All I do is write without any of that. So I think that's the bon mot, the idea behind that. I hope it's not a very controversial statement. Actually, it's meant to be just very straightforward in that sense, that there's that freedom, but it's also not a freedom, of course. Freedom to just write what you see on the page, but then, of course, constraint as well, because you can't wander off and do your own thing. So I might have to rethink that statement a little bit. I think it's a sort of a fun thing to say, and maybe food for thought, and it might sort of spark some pro and con ideas. But I'm interested in recreating what's on the page with Isaac Babel as well. I really wanted to recreate that effect that he had. And keep some of the strange things. Some critics were not happy about. I remember one word was chosen. So a prostitute appears in one of the stories, and she is naively corseted, as he says. Now, I think that is a very interesting image. She's naively corset. She's wearing a corset, but it's naively done. Like maybe the buttons aren't quite right. I don't know what it is. And so there was a tirade in the review, like, what do you mean, and blah, blah, and this is ridiculous, and so on and so forth. But Isaac Babel actually says that, and it's not my place to question or to iron it out like earlier translations have done. There is a school of thought that might say you need to iron that out, just make it sound nice. Don't shock the reader. But if it's going to shock the Russian reader into like, wow, what is that, and what is he saying? I'd love the English reader to have the same kind of response. So I'm definitely somebody who doesn't like ironing things out, making it sound pretty in English. Because, of course, Babel is a genius. There's a reason why he did that. Why should I tamper with that and diffuse what he's doing? So I don't know. Did I sort of answer your question?
Yeah, actually, you spoke about in the interview. Probably I need to reconstruct the word on the Greg. I think it's Gregory Rabasa. So put that in your interview.
Yes.
Just want to make sure that it's not something else. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean Gregory Rabasa, who's the great translator from Spanish, who is really the father of modern translation. I would say personally, and really sort of trained us, maybe not he did teach at CUNY, at the City University of New York. Now, that's not, I wasn't one of his students, but his paradigm, the way he worked, was very, very clear. And I knew him. He was lots of fun examples and anecdotes for writing. So yeah, no, thank you for that.
Thank you.
And continuing on with our next question, Mr. Palani has his hand raised, and if you do have a question, please raise your hand to be answered. But with him, he can please proceed.
Thanks, Pranav. Thank you so much, Professor Constantine, for the insightful answers so far. Right. One thing that intrigued me with your works, right, it ranges from Dostoevsky on one side and Machiavelli on the other side, and both of them, they have completely two different approaches towards human emotions, right? Machiavelli being so cynical and inherently he believes humans are ungrateful and so forth, right? Where Dostoevsky, even though he sees these aberrations, at the same time he believes in spiritual redemption and the inherent good natures of humans. So what drove you to look at these two opposite poles and do your translations?
Oh, well, another major master of style is Machiavelli, I would say. Like Isaac Babel, every word counts. It is an incredible tour de force of writing. And the irony in the subtexts. He's often maligned for The Prince, for the work that is best known for being cynical. And yes, maybe there is that undertone, but it's he is one of the, I would say that the four major stylists for me would have been Anton Chekhov. I would say, at least the ones that I've worked with. Isaac Babel, Machiavelli, and then Augustine in his Confessions, which is also an extraordinarily beautiful and precise, brilliant stylist writing. I think now that you ask the question that way, I think I'm drawn to beautiful writing and to fascinating writing and to different writing. And one of the challenges is to not fall into a trap of Peter Constantine translates Chekhov, Peter Constantine translates Machiavelli, and you can't tell which is who wrote what, because everything is actually Peter Constantine. So maybe in that sense, it's not the purest form of writing, meaning, well, I mean, translation in that sense might really be, and what I'm about to say is probably quite unfashionable, but let's say an act of mimicry, like mimicking the style and trying to bring it over. That is a thought of the 90s, of yesteryear. I think new translation theory might counter that and be upset that I just put it that way. But let's call it mimicry. I mean, trying to mimic what Dostoevsky might do in and I've not worked a lot with Dostoevsky. I've translated him more into German, actually. I've been doing lots of translations into German, which is my mother tongue, recently, mainly because I have a very good editor, which is, of course, also very useful for a translator. It's always good to work with someone. So that my experience with Dostoevsky, besides the Siberian Notebooks, which I translated into English, are more into German. Of course, also they're an incredible writer.
Thank you so much, Professor. You explained the spirit of translation in the process, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Polony, and thank you, Mr. Constantine, for that question again. And I believe the next question is coming from Arathirika, and so she may proceed with that.
Arathirika, do you see?
I didn't have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
She didn't have a question, Soundar.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think by mistake. I'll go with my question yeah, in between. In Tamil Nadu or in our language, right, we have folk songs. In villages, people sing, and then, some of our epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana, those stories are part of folk songs. So do you see a kind of folk songs in this, like endangered languages or any other languages? How, what are they? What is your experience? And it is becoming part of your translation. So any experience on it? Thank you.
Oh yes, actually, so for Arathirika, folk songs are the main body, let's say, or part of an important part of the main body, because it's not a written language, it's an oral language, and that goes for many of the endangered languages. So in a very rich and ancient tradition like Tamil literature, where there's a very broad many different styles, even from experimental modern poetry to folk songs, to folk stories, to proverb lists. I mean, all of these things are just it's very important, fascinating. So for me right now, and the project that I'm starting on, as I started on yesterday, will include folk songs with crib translations. I'm doing it right now in Arathirika and Greek, but I might. In fact, I'm thinking of doing it twice, doing a Greek version for Greece, as it is a Greek language, and then also doing an English version in the hope of maybe publishing it with Slavika or one of those specialized presses that are interested in regional languages and regional literatures. So it's interesting that you asked me that, because this is a thought that's been sort of bubbling in my head yesterday evening. And yesterday it came, and I started working on that.
Thank you, Mr. Soundar, for the question. And again, thank you to Professor Constantine for his answer. If anybody else has any questions, please do raise your hand at this moment.
Aishwarya is raising hand.
I see that Mr. Vinu has a question, and so he may proceed.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Peter, it's been a treat to listen to you and talk about languages and across the world and how it works in different spheres of original writing and translation. As someone like yourself who became very fluent in many languages at an early age, and someone who writes on their own, and someone who translates from languages of different era into one another, and someone who's trying to pursue the purest form of writing that you just put when you answered to Vivek. My question is that, in your experience of speaker and writer of many languages and as a translator, do you think that a particular language or particular dialect has an advantage over the others in terms of how it can offer as a tool for human conveyance of thought and thinking and the mind processes? I'd like to get your idea for this question from the idea that language is an imperfect tool, yes, someone would put it. So how is your experience of all this?
So do you mean that do you mean something like that Tamil, for instance, or Telugu might be able to express things in a more effective way than English in certain times, or English might be able to be more effective?
Yeah. So because each language has its own, although they are all perfected through evolution, even as a tool to become better and better. But do you have a sense that would you like to rank a particular language in a different place when it comes to a point that language can express even closer to someone's thinking, something like that.
Well, that's actually that's a fascinating question, because people often feel that they're, let's say with Greek, when you say certain things in Greek, it can only be said that way, and nobody can really translate it. One has that feeling, and I think one has that feeling as well in many languages. Well, Tamil, I'm sure there are things in Tamil that are just so Tamil, or Telugu that are so Telugu. But well, the job of the translator, of course, is to try and cross, cross those barriers. I'm not sure. You see, I personally feel that there are certain things that I'm happier to say in Austrian dialect German, which was my first language. It's a language I would speak to babies and things. I wouldn't speak English. I mean, there, for instance, I would have a personal problem. Let's say if I'm raising a child, it would be in German and not in English. Because it would be like what? Hello, little child, how are you? Do come here. I mean, I don't know. I don't have that vocabulary of the inkle, winkle, dinkle, winkle, the sort of thing. But that's a personal thing, perhaps, because English is capable, although I would say its diminutives and its frothy, sort of little bubbly moments seem to be less. It seems a bit of a colder language. But I would say, no, I would say your question is spot on. It confuses me, I think, because I have so many different languages, and I feel differently about them. They're also at different levels. Like, for instance, Russian for me is an intellectual language for which I've done most of the translations. But Greek is a spoken language. Arbanitika is a sort of a lost language that's there, and that I'm writing in now. I had to create a alphabet for it because there isn't one. I mean, people have written in Arbanitika over the years, usually in Greek, in a modified Greek alphabet, but there's no academy that says this is how it should be done. So, as we say, everyone writes the way they want in Arbanitika. So having to create an alphabet in order to do that. But I think you can tell that your question has confused me, because I'm sort of like wandering around, sort of from one thought and one language to the other. But I hope I've sort of answered it. But do ask a follow-up if there's something more specific that you wanted to see if I might be able to say something about.
Yeah, I think you answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vinu, for the question. And again, thank you, Professor Constantine, for the answer. I do see in chat here that order for questioning, they said, is Bashir, followed by Mr. Shankar and Ms. Sarada. So if Mr. Bashir would like to ask his question, now would be the time.
I think he's driving or something. We can read it out, his question. When reading writers like Babel, getting into straight away, let's say, Red Cavalry, without being cognizant of the historical backdrop and his personal connection, reading experience may not be fully enriching. How does a first-time reader approach writers like Babel? Do they need any prior preparation?
Oh, well, actually, I have two thoughts about that. So in the book, there are three introductions, prefaces, introductions. Natalie Babel, I myself did an introduction and a translator's preface. That's one thing that gives a context, and I think that's why introductions and prefaces can be very useful. With Isaac Babel, I also feel, though, that you can really start at page 1 and just read, because it doesn't matter. You don't need any context. They're crossing in the very first story. They're crossing the river. They end up in a war-torn area. They enter a Jewish house. You can tell that the narrator is a Jew who's pretending not to be a Jew. Because he couldn't be a Jew really in the cavalry. So he's taken on the name Lyutov, which is a Russian name. and that was Babel's name throughout the Red Cavalry, the name that he used. And then actually, I don't necessarily want to give away what happens, but there are these terrible moments of violence that suddenly happen. Not, it's not a sort of it's a violence that is I want to say a fascinating read. It's probably a wrong way of putting it. But what I mean by that is not an off-putting. It's not like, oh God, I can't read this. It is done in a way that makes you think, that makes you live the situation and understand fully what is going on. So my argument would be that you can start Red Cavalry or the Odessa stories or the play Sunset, but particularly the Red Cavalry and the Odessa stories from page one and just read the stories. And as I said, they are 1 or 2 pages. So for a busy day, one can sort of have a quick coffee and read a story here and there and not need to know any background whatsoever, would be my view, yeah.
Thank you again for the question. I'll just proceed through Zoom. I see that Mr. Ajudin has his hand raised, and so if you would like to ask his question, now would be the time to do so.
Hi, Peter.
Hello.
Good to see you again. Actually, I had 2 questions. One, you had translated some of Sophocles' tragedies, right, from the ancient Greece. I wanted to know how the ancient Greece relates to the modern Greece that you speak contemporarily, and also about your translation of Ismail Kadr, the Albanian writer. I've always been curious about the neighboring countries, Albania and Greece. They seem totally contrasting in their cultures, but they do seem to share some of the demographics, and also there is a close relation culturally as well. Would you like to talk about Albania and its relation to the Greek?
Yes. So with Sophocles, I think our experience in Greece is perhaps similar to maybe a Hindi or Urdu speaker connecting to Sanskrit, meaning that you have to study it. It doesn't mean you can sit back and understand, but so much vocabulary, so much. It is to a large extent. It seems to me, but of course, everyone here will know much more about that than I do. There seems to be a continuum. In other words, Sanskrit developing slowly into the northern Indian languages, but also
the Tamil.
Yes.
Ancient Tamil and contemporary Tamil relates in a peculiar way, like you
exactly.
said.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. I was going to say that I think Tamil speakers seem to also have a connection to Sanskrit in the fact that there is vocabulary that is used, from what I've seen. But maybe that's a good example. I mean, ancient Tamil to modern Tamil, and so that the fact that ancient Greek is very present in modern Greece, I think that's one thing. And of course, we learn ancient Greek as well. So my translation of Sophocles, I think what was different about it to all the other ones is that I perceive the language as a language and not as a state of mind, meaning that let's say an American or English classicist might translate Sophocles, but it's an artificial language learned in class. For us, it's a living language. It isn't, but it has that feel. It is Greek.
Yes.
So I think that was my connection there. As far as Ismail Kadr is concerned, I mean, I studied Albanian, and what helped me was Arathirika. As I mentioned earlier, the heritage language Arathirika is sort of developed from 12th, 13th, 14th century Albanian. It not developed from, but let's say the two languages split. And so Arathirika spoken in southern Greece and 1,000 miles or whatever north, maybe more, the language develops within the country in its own way, which means that one can connect to the language. I'm wondering, I mean, if it's something like maybe Oriya and Bengali. I mean, I don't know enough about the. I mean, I tried to learn Oriya, I will admit.
I think the parallel would be Sinhala language spoken in Sri Lanka and Odia. They both have some common ancestry, but totally different geographical.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. Meaning that it's easier for me to learn Albanian than it is for somebody who doesn't know Arathirika. I then also translated there are three short pieces by Ismail Kadare, he died recently, the great Albanian writer. Every year one wondered if he was going to get the Nobel Prize, but he didn't. I recommend his novels, actually. They are amazing reads. So I only did one of them, and it was done through knowledge of Arathirika and with the dictionary. So it was a bit of a struggle, but checked very carefully because ultimately it's the end product in translation that's important. So when it's if you have a safety network, editors who can help and who know the language and who can edit, then I think it's a good thing to do, because translators do have different strengths. You might have a translator who's absolutely fluent in Albanian, it's his mother tongue, and so on and so forth, and the English is problematic. So translating into English, that means the English would need a lot of help with editing and getting it up to speed. If it's the other way around, that you have somebody who's a extraordinary stylist in English, but the Albanian's a bit wobbly, or the French or the Russian or whatever, then it's quite important actually to have fact checks so that you don't make mistakes, because mistakes will happen. So line reading is very, very important. Every line, does it fit? Is it correct? Was something misunderstood? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I believe that Mr. Shankar had a question. He had his hand raised. If he still has that question, absolutely now would be the time to ask it.
No, I'll skip it. I think there are a few other questions. I'll skip mine.
All right. And in that case, I believe that Mrs. Sharada had a question. If this would be a great time to ask.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just go ahead and ask. So you had written an earlier book called Japanese Street Slang, right? It was one of your earlier works, and I found that very interesting. I had two questions. One, like, how did you start that project of recording street slang? And the other related question is probably the more important question. I'm very curious to know how you approach translating slang in fiction. Like, what is the right balance to strike?
Well, yeah. So Japanese Street Slang was the very first book I ever did, and I was in my early 20s in New York, and I was working at the Hilton Hotel, actually, as the international representative was the name that I had. But what that meant was dealing with standing at the reception and dealing with problems that people had who didn't speak English. And the fact that I spoke German, French, Japanese was quite useful, Spanish, at that desk, because that was the only job, really, like to help people, whether it's check-in, whether now New York in the early 1980s was quite dangerous. People were being mugged on the streets. It was a sort of relatively violent town at the time, city. So going to the police department and interpreting when this was robbed or this person was attacked. So there was all of that. But in the 80s, as you might know, Japan had flourished and become a major superpower suddenly. And what that meant was that the Hilton Hotel, with its 2,000 rooms here in New York, was filled with Japanese. So Japanese was the only language that I was really working with, or let's say 90% was Japanese. So it was every day with these things. And what I noticed, and what everyone noticed at the time, was that this sudden interest in America for Japan and people interested in Japanese culture, but there were no apt grammar books. There were, but the grammar books were very staunch and very conservative. They taught a very formal type of Japanese that is not really necessarily spoken. So, things like, good day, my name is Peter Constantine. May I ask you, what is your name? This sort of thing. But not like, hey, how are you? What are you doing? Whatever. I mean, none of that. So there wasn't a whole range. So I thought, well, let me do a book now for something that will counter this staunch. And the levels of speech in Japanese are very important. And it was just that one level. Japanese has male grammar and female grammar. So, for instance, you might say, Jodan janai, like dayo, for instance, would be an ending that males might use, and wayo would be like Jodan janai wayo. This isn't a joke. That just came that way. Now, if a man says that sounds extraordinarily feminine, but people would make that mistake. So it was important to also sort of lay out, like, this is what males would say, this is what females would say, this is what male gangsters would say, this is what female gangsters would say. So anyway, street slang became more and more chaotic. The book became not chaotic, but more and more out there. Language of drugs, language of street crime. I just wanted to really put out like what is spoken, to capture language that hadn't been written down. And then the next book after that, Japanese Slang Uncensored, that's where I went all the way. I mean, that's where the language of prostitution, of drugs, of smuggling, of everything. I'm not sure if that book is still available. I don't know. But what's also interesting, of course, and I did write that in the introduction, was that this slang is the language of now. It's going to change within a year or two or three. It was funny to see on Amazon, because the book stayed in print 20 years later. Oh, nobody says that anymore. Because there's things like, for instance, oh, groovy, really? Who says groovy? Or a rad, which everyone was saying in, oh, whoops, there it is, which people were saying in the 80s and 90s here in New York. So that's the kind of language that would be in that book. So I would say for natural street slang, that's not quite. I did an update a few years ago, but even that, I think at this point is, moves on, slang changes. So how to translate? Well, that is a very complicated question, really, because you have various choices. You can translate into the slang of your own language, but then it suddenly sounds like someone is from Brooklyn or from Hyderabad, let's say, if you're translating into Telugu as one example. So if you're translating Salinger, let's say, into Telugu, what do you do with the slang? Do you make them sound like they are young people from Hyderabad, the scene, out there, sort of speaking that way? Is that the right thing to do? So I think every translator has to really think about what they want to do, and what the reader will expect and find. It's a dangerous territory. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think for a final question, Ms. Radhika had a question.
Yes, hi. I'll quickly read out my question. So, in your upcoming book, you investigate what makes language reclamation projects successful, and I can imagine that community buy-in and being sufficient material, they are prerequisites for project success. But what other factors are at play? Have there been efforts that haven't been successful, and what went wrong there?
Oh, actually, so success, I'm very glad you said that, because there is a very specific thought about that. Now, first of all, what often happens is, and less so now, but what had often happened was that outside forces dictated or evaluated what was going on within the community. So in other words, for me to sort of, who am not Passamaquoddy, to say, well, the Passamaquoddy aren't really doing that well because, I went there and they're having trouble speaking. But it's not up to me to decide whether it was really successful. It's more of a community thing. And as we mentioned before, a community might just want ceremonial language, very, very specifically, meaning or greetings. So when you meet somebody, you will greet them in Malisit or in Hualapai. Well, I'm just mentioning languages that I find fascinating. Let's say you might just say hello in the language, and that's what the community might want to do. And then speak English and so on, and then the goodbyes and the thank yous and just markers. So if that's what a community is hoping for and looking for, then that's a success story. And it would be unfair to sort of say, well, they haven't really done that well. But in certain language reclamation projects rely on word lists that might just be several hundred words. And then, as you mentioned, I think there are languages that are around, right? Related languages where paradigms can be picked up. And so linguists might enrich in a language with that. But so it's very difficult and maybe controversial to evaluate a program like that. It should be up to the community to see how they feel about what they're doing and what they want to do. I think you asked something else as well, though, right?
No, I mean, I just wanted to know if a project is not successful per the community's own expectations, then what typically goes wrong in cases like that?
Then I would think what might happen is, and I think that's probably the typical thing is high expectations. In other words, we'll learn the language and we'll speak it, and it'll be the only language we'll speak, and then that doesn't quite work out. So setting the wrong kind of another problem that has happened. It happened in Cornish, for instance, is that different factions want to bring back different
spellings,
not only spellings but also different types of Cornish. Like Cornish Novegda was the Cornish based on the last the way it was spoken pretty much before it stopped being spoken, meaning simpler grammar, simplified maybe English words in it, that not the High Cornish of the 14th century, but the main movers wanted really the older, more conservative, which was also much harder to learn. So there were different factions that wanted different spellings, different grammar, and then you have often, let's say, infighting within a community that, from what I understand, this was very much, so my niece had studied at the Cornish Academy, so I got a lot of sort of feedback from what was going on there. But I hear that now that's been ironed out, and I think everyone's fallen into sort of a harmonious moving forward, which is of course a good thing, because if there are 500 speakers of a language and they're all at war with each other, that's not a good thing in a small community. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
And thank you all to those who asked questions. And again, a big warm thank you to Professor Constantine for his time here today and the questions that he was able to answer. I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Soundar in order to do our closing remarks for this session.
Thanks, Pranav. It seems I got a message from Venu. He had one question, and after his question, we will close the session.
All right, cool. Then Mr. Venu, the question you have, you can absolutely ask it.
Venu or Vivek? Yeah, Venu. It was Venu. Venu, unmute yourself. Okay, I give you a minute, otherwise we'll be closing this. Okay, thank you all. Definitely, it is a wonderful session. A lot of preparation went in. Actually, this entire session was inspired by Sharada and Radhika. They produced a video introducing Peter before our Living Tamil Lit Fest. It was an eye opener for us. Who Peter is and how multilingual translator it is very rare to find. At least we have come to know. And this is the first one that we could invite whomever attended from Living Tamil Lit Fest. We are very happy, Sir Peter Constantine. We are very happy, and thanks to you for giving us time and also giving us all your inputs while we were preparing for this. That made this entire conversation very productive, friendly. Yeah, we got a lot of information. I see already people are sad. There are languages are dying, and they are asking. I think that particular topic really got into a lot of audience. And then Babel introduction by Sharada was awesome, and then you added why he was killed and all. So it's great experience, and yeah, it is also you made it very converse. Like when Sarada finished, and then you added your insight. Radhika finished, you added some more points, and then it made it very live. That we actually this is little bit changed how we do the things, but it really very useful and enjoyable. Thanks, Peter Constantine. And then I also found Esther Allen joined, and then he sent me a note. She has classes, but thank her. And then Chad was to traveling somewhere in the world always, and he did join, and then he stayed through the session. I appreciate. And then Peter Constantine, when you were answering, then you talked about Jennifer, your agent, and then I found out she is also there, and I thank her for joining, allocating time. I may miss someone. I know Jaymohan joined and then he left, but he was behind us all the time, and he guides this type of session, and he is behind us for every activity. Thanking him. And I know Ajidan and you are working behind the scenes some interviews, and it is good to see. Maybe it is it is other way around. Ajidan interviewed you today. He asked a question. So thanks for that. So it made it very live, this session. So we enjoyed it. Jen, now I see you came on video. Good to see you wherever you are. So yeah, it's awesome, and there are enough translators and writers here. I cannot name everyone. I saw Aishwarya is one of our translators. He had done a few books of Jaimon sir. So yeah, it is good to see group of writers, translators beyond readers. So it's a good session. And then again, I appreciate Radhika and Sarda how they prepared for their speech. They're well prepared, well presented. Thanking them. And then Pranav, you are the first one from the second generation to moderate this session. You did fantastic job. Very good introduction to introduce Peter to the world. And you moderated, asked right people, and provided a good summary in between. Pranav, wonderful job. Thanking you. Hope you and your friends will join, and then Arathirika, you sung well, and it was our Kamaramayam Arangetram song. So thanks for singing and making the wonderful session. And I want to see more and more Pranav Arathirika to this call, definitely. I think if I miss and behind the scene, always what question to be added and who asks, and then there is behind the scene preparation. Parni Jodi, thank you, and then Sharada, Radhika again, thank you. So behind the scene, whoever worked, Swarna and Ravikumar, they also helped me to prepare this meeting. Thanking them, and then the entire Vishnupuram Literary Circle and friends. When I say Vishnupuram Literary Circle friends, it's across the globe. This organization is now has branches everywhere, UK and Europe, other continents. Someone might have joined from Australia also. It's a global presence. So thanking you all. If I missed, I imagine I have said your name too. Thank you all again. Wonderful session. Pranav, it's
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, a big thank you to Professor Constantine for taking time out of your day. I'm sure this is a huge step for the Vishnupuram Literary Circle. And again, thank you for your time today. And I officially can close the session. So if you want to stay around, maybe ask some questions, perhaps do that if time permits. Obviously, whatever works with his schedule. But I thank you for today. That is the session.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Yes, thank you very much for the wonderful questions and the wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.